brilliant.
Called EWE, Ecopath of Ecosystem. I did try to explain to Billy, the man kind of in charge of writing the thing, that an EWE spells ewe in Australia, which means a female sheep. He didn't seem to want to change the name. The reason that we've chosen to teach you this one is because it is something we think you can get a little bit of a feel for in the amount of time we've got here. Most of the other end-to-end models take about 6 weeks of classes and then 3 years of slavery, as Michael will tell you. Get anywhere. So we wanted to liven it up a little bit. So these ones you should be able to get a bit of a sense of over the next couple of days. So Ecopath is kind of the starting point for it. Basically, it's all based around trophodynamic interaction. So this isn't, well, it's a food web in the sense that it's an aggregated one that you put into Ecopath. It's not the really spaced out species by species one that you'll see from people like Jason Mill. But it does give you a bit of a sense of how complicated they can actually be. Ecopath is an incredibly popular piece of software. It is very easy to use. It's just like filling in a spreadsheet. All the little blue dots up there are all the ones that I knew of. But I think Billy says there's about twice as many around the world. There's even one for Europa, which is a moon around Saturn. So I'm thinking about what it might look like. Most of them are in the marine realm, but there are some land and lake examples as well. It's about 25 years old now. It has developed, like all of these models, through time to include more and more. So basically, what you've got to think about when you're putting them together is what you actually want to model. So as with any kind of model, it's got simplifications. And initially, about 10 years, 15 years ago, it was quite fashionable to be Ecopath hater. And it does linger on in some quarters still. But in reality, it's as good as any other model. You just have to be careful about how you use it. So when you're putting values in, it is quite easy to put in a value that doesn't make ecological sense. So you have to keep yourself honest by checking all your assumptions all the time. So I will quite regularly get a paper to review where they've given the mortality rate for sharks to be the same as you get for plankton. So can you imagine 300 generations of a shark in a year? And I wrote to them and say, this doesn't make ecological sense. And they write back and say, but it balances. No, that's not the one. So this version of the world here is fine. This is an artist's impression of a bay that I live in, but it's as close to a nice picture as I could find. This is a cartoon that I stole off the internet, but it's supposed to represent the same system. This is actually fine for asking the right questions as long as you're aware of the simplification. So one of the things I like to teach my students is that you have to be the biggest critic of your model. So if you're absolutely someone who just hates models, which you quite often get from us, a skeptical audience, you're not going to actually get any insight from them anyway. If you're a true believer though, which a lot of people who don't use the models actually end up being, they believe what comes out of the computer. There's a lot of the younger generation, like my kids' generation in their teens, who also just believe whatever comes out of the computer. And you're like, come on, that 2 plus 2 does not equal 6. I don't care whether a computer says it. So you have to be critical about what you put in your model and what it's actually saying out the other way. But if you're a pragmatic realist, then you can actually get some useful insights. And Ecopath is a prime example of that. The basic idea behind Ecopath is actually pretty simple. Basically what happened, and Rashid can correct me when I say something wrong here, but basically a guy called Jeff Colavina about 30 years ago had been tasked with trying to think up some ecosystem information for Hawaiian Islands. And so he just took an accounting method and said, okay, if you think about the turnover and production of biomass in the system, you know, they can't destroy biomass, we can't invent it, so it must all sum up. So he just created an accounts balancing sheet. And in there he had production, which is the amount of production of an animal, equals how much we catch, how much of it gets eaten, how much of it is just accumulating through time, so if there's an invading species coming into the system, it's kind of on its own trajectory. How much of it moves into or out of the system in a year, and then other sources of mortality that you can't capture in the model. It was never supposed to be an equilibrium model. So that's another criticism you hear of it, is that it's an equilibrium one and thus it's bad to an ecologist. It's just supposed to balance over the course of a year. Most of the time you don't actually have data for the whole system for a single year, but you've got to try to aim for that. The other main assumption or equation that it uses is that what you eat equals the production plus the unassimilated food plus the respiration. So they're the three things you've got to cover out of what you eat. And that means that there are some nice rules of thumb that fall out about the ratio of what you consume versus what you see as production. So some of those rules that we now hear about a lot that have been backed up by data is that 10% of the biomass, only 1/10 of what you eat appears in the next trophic level. Okay? Those kind of rules were explored using ECO. So this is what, to lose the audience again, this is the basic equation behind EcoPath. They often reorganize it to make it easier to solve. So basically what you get is a set of simultaneous equations. So it's actually a really straightforward process that you can, if you're someone who likes to do things, you can unpack that code. You can either share the repository with them, it's an open source piece of software, or you can actually retype it yourself. It's a pretty straightforward piece of mathematics. But if you think about the way that it's actually representing the web, it's representing pools of biomass and then the consumption transfers between. So for any one kind of animal, you've got the total consumption is basically the sum over all of the things it eats. The prey mortality is total consumption of biomass, and then the standard old fishing mortality, which is just catching biomass. So they're all pretty simple pieces of information we're trying to pull together. That's why it's almost impossible to do it anywhere in the world. You always have to bring in information from somewhere else. And we'll get into data pedigrees and how you deal with that a little bit later on. So if you think about how biomass can dissipate through the system, so you have the bit that have the respiration side of things, the unassimilated food side of things, but you also have this EE. That was another source of controversy around EcoPath. It's ecotrophic efficiency. How much of the production of that animal is used within the system? And really it's just a fitting parameter. It's really explaining what you can't explain with the model. It's saying this proportion of that animal's production I don't cover in this model. Most of the time an experienced modeler will let the model have that as its unspecified term and its simultaneously equation. So it's solving to give you EE. EE is what's spat out. And you can use that then to see how sensible your input assumptions were. Because most of the time there's some pretty good idea about what roughly EE should be as you go through the system. Something you do see that you can do, because really you've just got to have one unexplained term per equation. You can see people put in an EE if they don't know what the biomass is. That's a slightly dangerous thing because it says you know enough about the system to say what you can't say about the system. And typically, if you don't know what the biomass is, you probably shouldn't be specifying how much of it you know you're using. Basically, though, it should be close to 1 for most groups. So if you think about the middle of the system, it should be fairly close to 1 for that. That's the part you're focused on. You should be explaining most of the system there. At the bottom part, the microbial food web, there's lots of you would already know. A lot of that doesn't ever enter the metazoan food web, the big food web. It gets turned over at the bottom. So those EEs can actually be quite likely because they're actually just going into the triters and out of the metazoans. And at the top end, the very top predators, most of those will be close to 0 because they don't really get eaten by much. It's a question across most end-to-end models about those top predators. So whether it's Atlantis or Osmos or EWE or whatever, we are missing knowledge on the fundamental thing that controls sharks. Every one of the models in the world wants to fill the world with sharks. We don't know what controls those top trophic levels. It's not predation. It's not food. There's usually enough food around for them. So it'll be some other mechanic that we don't know that controls. So pretty much we can say, give you rules of thumb about what EE should be. Basically what this little message means is that for your forage animals, the animals in the middle that are the food for most things, they're not very likely to die of old age. So you should be explaining most of their mortality through predation. Okay, so if we think about that consumption equation we had before, so consumption equals production, respiration, and unassimilated food, then really what you do to get respiration is you're just reorganising it to get that. So there's lots of, Because there's sets of simultaneous equations and you can have as many groups as you like, which has created its own little almost religious groups within the ecopath world. You have a minimum number of groups, you have a maximum number of groups. Are you a lumper or a splitter? We have a bit of a joke term called, is that an Oki model? He seems to have like 400 groups every time he does anything. You have to be a little bit careful about how you put these things together. But because there can be so many groups, you have so many parameters, so you're tempted to start fiddling with things that are probably not best left alone, but probably don't lead you very far. So the only thing that changes your unassimilated food effects is your respiration. It's not really going to help you cascade through the whole model balance. It is useful, but don't waste a lot of time. Basically, again, rules of thumb. Use ecopath as a bit of a cartoon of the world, really. It's an insightful, useful cartoon, but what you see often with people who've come from a hydrodynamics or a physical background or a plankton background, they really worry about the fourth decimal place. When you don't know the detritus for 2 orders of magnitude, don't worry about the fourth decimal place, okay? It's a rough cartoon. You're after trying to get the picture accurate, you're not after exactly a precise picture, you're not going to get it, okay? So your rules of thumb will work okay. So default's at about 20%, and that's generally okay. There's a couple of kinds of animals where a slightly higher value makes more ecological sense, but you can refine that as you go through. So it's about a bit like sketching, if you've ever seen an artist's work. He sort of sketches in the basic picture first and then he fills in the detail. Okay, so what you've got to do when you're defining your groups, you've got to have at least one detritus group, so you've got to define things as dead or alive. Even I can manage that one, that's pretty easy. Then you've got whether they're a producer or a consumer, so if they're a primary producer, are they things like kelp or algae or phytoplankton, or are they consumer? So the one that usually gets short shrift in ecopath is bacteria. Theoretically, you can have a bacteria that's a bit producer, a bit consumer. I'm about the only person who ever puts bacteria in ecopath model. Most people like, get rid of that one, it's too hard. The other aspect that they've brought in over the last probably 5 or 6 years is to allow for having multiple age classes, so that you can actually, before you had to have them as separate groups, now you can actually have it spread out. So you have a little bit of a population model for a group inside. So you can have a larval stage and a juvenile stage and an adult stage that are all interconnected. The very first version of ecopath and Ecosim, because they were separate groups, you could have all your adult fish eat all the baby fish and not suffer an impact. So that's why I had to put this connected stanza approach so that you didn't break some of the rules of conservation and population, as we call it. Okay, so this is how multi-stanzas work. We basically break it. They don't have to be even numbers of ages. You can see that there's quite a large number in this adult, number of age beings in this adult group versus the youngest group. But basically what you're trying to do is look for where there's bottlenecks in the system. So you're trying to find total mortality rates, if there's shifts in prey or habitat through time, if there's different ways that they use the system basically, or if there's different vulnerabilities to fishing. So particularly if there's a tension between fleets, so a lot of the times you've got one fleet, so say the shrimp fleet in the Gulf of Mexico, is catching baby snapper. Those baby snapper can grow up to be the target of a different fishery. So that can cause an interaction between the fisheries and actually lead to physical violence between the fisheries, not just cause ecological problems. There was I did a lot of work on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, and there was a brawl in a fishing town one day between the old fishermen who used one particular method that didn't affect reefs and the young fishermen who used the different method that did affect reefs, and the police just stood back and said, well, we're not getting in the middle of this. They can sort it out between them. It lasted for 4 days. Not quite as long as when the Australians fought the Americans in World War II, but that's a different story. So basically, when you're trying to create groups in any ecological model, but particularly in ecopath, you have to think about what you want your groups to represent. So you don't typically break it up taxonomically. You break it up based on the role of that animal in the system. So it's kind of a function, it's literally a function of what function does that group have in the system? What does it eat? What habitat does it use? Does it provide habitat for something else? So that's why you can see why you might want to, in animals that change their diet radically through time, that's why you might want to split some of that out. So you can lump to a point, so you can say, right, they're both penguins, they both eat fish, you know, so we can lump them together. At some point though, you have to start omitting them. If you overlump things, you can create model artifacts that aren't teaching you anything. So if you lump all penguins in Antarctica together, there's such a diversity of diets behind them and life histories that you'd actually get an artifact. You wouldn't get a penguin. So sometimes Franken sharks, like some Michael's poster works, those particular sharks all eat vaguely the same thing. It works. One of the biggest sins of the original ecopark models was that they lumped all invertebrates together. They'd have 3 different kinds of killer whale, the ones that came near people, the ones that lived near rocks, the ones that lived in open land, and then they'd have all benthic invertebrates stuck in one group. You've got to sort of break that habit. You've got to try and think about all parts of the system in the same, on the same level of resolution. So it's actually can't just be based on data though. If you know that something has a critical role in the system but no one's ever bothered to collect information on it, you can't necessarily just leave it out. And again, the Southern Ocean is a good example of that. So I was involved in a bit of a modelling attempt about 15 years ago in Antarctica. And sitting in the room, it's one of those lovely political arenas of Camilala where they've all got the political hat as well as the science hat on. In the General Assembly, they didn't want to talk about anything but krill. And I asked, what happens when the krill's not there? And the Russians leads over jellyfish, salps. So I said, what about salps? And I said, oh, no one believes that but the Russians. And they wouldn't speak to me. But it's actually, there was a bifurcation. You could get really different system states. Even today, there's not a lot of information collected on salps or fish or squid in the Southern Ocean as yet. Partly because it's so bloody hard to go down there. But we know that they have an important alternative role. So if you don't include them, you have to be conscious about the limitations you're putting on your model. Sometimes it's better to say, I'm really uncertain, and we're just going to give an impromptu lecture on uncertainty tomorrow. It's better to sometimes say that I'm really uncertain, but it could be like this, and just explore what that could be looks like, rather than to say, no, we have to be very sure. And that's particularly in climate change. You'll see people go, it's all of these different factors from the social or the economic side, but they're too hard to model, so we'll leave them out. When you start to play with some of these models, you can't afford to do that. You do have to be upfront about the uncertainties you have, and one of the uncertainties is what Carl Walters, who also helped write this program, calls the vampire in the basement. So I don't know how many of you watched the really crappy 1980s horror movies, but typically something would come out of the basement and get you unexpectedly. And that's his idea of, it's what you left out of the model that'll be the thing that proves to be important in the future. So it's the vampire in the basement that comes out of nowhere. You have to be aware of that. That means you've got to try multiple different kinds of models. And in something that's pretty easy to use like EcoPath or a qualitative model that Ingrid will tell you about later, every time you come, you can't do this forever because you obviously get explosion of dimensionality, but pretty much what I try to do is, for the first couple of classes at least, every time I come to a critical assumption, I try to keep both going. What if it was this, or what if it was that? So I'm going to get the quote wrong, but one of my lecturers gave this big fancy quote of someone important, and basically the guy said, every time you choose to put something in a model, you've chosen not to put in 10,000 other things. You need to be a bit conscious about the decisions you're making when you're putting, particularly one of these kind of models together. So top predators are really important to have in there. They do tend to constrain what's coming down. But getting back to the lake idea that we heard about the other day, where you could tell what the parameterization was going to be based on the politics. It wasn't so much the politics, but we did learn pretty early on, about 15 years ago, that the background of the model was important at that point. So we all then sort of collaboratively started to think about processes we all needed. What had happened was that Carl had come from a fisheries background. So he had lots of buffering effects for top-down forces. I'd come from a general marine biology maths background and was being mentored or helped by someone who was a plankton modeler. So I had lots of bottom-up compensating mechanisms. So when we compared the two models, it was being dictated by the background of the modeler. So mine damped environmental effects, but blew up every time we did it with fisheries, and his was vice versa. So that's why you have to think about what were the core principles. So that's why we sat down and rethought the whole process. And there started to be, if you look at all the different models from the different backgrounds over the last 10 to 15 years, they're converging on a common set of processes. They don't have a common structure or a common approach. They do have a common set of processes that do seem to be the fundamental processes that drive ecosystems. Part of that is the age structure stuff. Okay, so if we start to look at what some of the interface looks like. So when you're first setting up an EcoPath model, I don't know how many of you can read that, but this is the model we'll actually be playing with. I learned pretty early on when I was giving this class that people would get really upset about the ecology of the animals. They would focus on whether the urchin should really be doing that with the lobster. So now we play with mermaids. So we have the old wise mermaids, the uncontrollable teenage mermaids, the ankle biter mermaids. So in Australia, an ankle biter is a kid under about the age of 5. Then we have jaws, as in the big sharks. We've had 6 fatal shark attacks in Australia in the last 10 months, so jaws seem somehow appropriate. We have the big fishies, the flying fishies, because I think they're cute. The bottom grunge dweller, so a bit like the blobfish that we saw this morning. The little fishies, the jellies, the wriggly worms, the little floaty crunchy things, which are zooplankton. The green stuff, which is the phytoplankton, and then the crap and dead stuff, which is the dendrites. So we actually also have a Lord of the Rings version that my children wrote once they were very bored and I was driving them on holiday. Or there's one that has virgins and forests and unicorns, I think. But basically, you when you're defining a group, you have to say what colour you want it to be on in your box that it spits out. That's kind of incidental. Whether it's a consumer, you can see how easy it is to fill this in. It's just a set of tick, tick, tick. So is it a consumer, is it a producer, is it a tribe? And then it fills in these for you. If you've got multi-stanzas, you want to say how long that stanza lasts. So these ankle biters start at their weight, what they get born into. After 12 months, they become teenagers, and after 24 months, they become wide-stage mermaids. So I think mermaids are pretty short-lived animals. So for each group, you have to give it its name and all that kind of stuff. So you can tailor it quite heavily to what you want out of it. These are the basic kinds of data and units that you want them in. So you've got the biomass of the group in the area that you're worried about. It's kind of production and biomass ratio, so I'll explain a little bit of how you can get these values in a minute. The consumption on biomass, it's ecotrophic efficiency, which you should really let EcoPath solve for. The diets of the animals in proportion, so you just need proportion by weight of the diet. The landings, so that's the actual catch that comes out of the ocean and ends up in the port. And then you've got the discards. So one of the terminology things that could trip you up is that when a fisheries person says catch, they actually mean what gets to the port, plus the bits that they yanked out and then killed and then threw overboard. Okay? That's a total thing, is catch. Landings is what gets to the port. And then they don't use it consistently, so sometimes catch is landing. So, but basically, this is the basic data entry sheet, and this is why it's so easy to use, but it's so easy to misuse, because it is so simple to get going. That's why you have to be your own judge. So basically, you can say whether it lives in a whole area. So for argument's sake, I've just said yes, they can. There's another little interface for entering stuff to do with stanzas. But pretty much what you do is you just literally type in how much biomass is there, what's the production and consumption. And then you run a simulated rate, basically. And then how much detritus is flowing in from outside the system. So in places like seamounts, where you've got a big flux coming past, you need to play with things like that. Okay. So basically the other thing is if you see a cell with a little set of hashes in the corner, that means there's a comment. You have to come down to the remarks section to see what the comment is. So this is, it became our habit quite early on, and it's something that really quite likes to do. It's not just to keep a log on a piece of paper, but to write into the model itself where you got the data from. What have you done to get that into balance? Now keep a log yourself that's easy to access. It gives you information about the model. So you also don't necessarily, you have to be careful about how you define, because it's a mass balance one. You won't get all data for one period of time. but you shouldn't try to overstuff it either. So you've got a biomass time series from, say, a trawl survey or something that looks like this. This is actually, you should have 3 models. One for this period, one for that period, and one for that period. At least for EcoPath. You can try and join it by running through time with EcoSim, which we'll talk about in a minute. But if you're just having EcoPath, you need to be careful about how much you want to use. Because it's likely that the ecosystem was behaving differently over here, or even here. Okay, so if we think about production of biomass, there's another really smart guy that works with Rashid called Daniel Corley, and he spent ages of time in very hot countries collecting lots of fish so that he could come up with really useful equations like this one. So obviously what you try to do is you try to get the best data on the species of interest in the spot that you are. But like I said, for most fish in the sea, you're not going to have that. So you try and look for a species in the same system, or the same species in a different system. But if all of that fails, there's a whole bunch of really useful first estimates, basically. So they'll be uncertain, but pretty much this kind of rule applies. This is sort of the size of the animal, the temperature of the animal, and kind of what it's probably the non-related growth. So basically, they're fairly easy things to get at the system level. The natural mortality estimate. And then what P on B actually represents is if your total production of biomass in something that's supposed to be mass conserved, you're just going to equal your total mortality. So you have your natural mortality plus your fishing mortality will equal that. There's a couple other relationships that you can also grab from equally many fish, but in cold places typically. But you can use those rules of thumb when you get started. One of the places that you spend most of your time worrying about is consumption. So this is it's a bit dark, but there's a shark about to eat a fish there. So you can either try and collect this information in the field, which is quite hard, or as Billy chuckles and says, you can spend 10 years in the lab, but it's actually something that's pretty hard to get. So again, you have to be a bit sensible. You can literally spend 5 years in the lab, or you can just think about what makes sense. So you sort of have your chain. This is the average growth, this is their average mortality. This leads you to that kind of biomass curve. We know the most food consumption from physiology studies. So that means it's kind of like this. So that's why it's good to keep multiple versions of the model going. Because one of probably the biggest weaknesses of any end-to-end model is the level of uncertainty you have. Okay? It's going to be huge. So try and keep different versions going so that you've got a bit of an eclectic nature and look over things. You're not sort of believer in one model that happens to be highly uncertain. Again, thinking to some of the work that Daniel's done, in fish that are symmetrical, so you can see if we're cutting down the middle, it sort of looks the same in the top and the bottom half. There's rules. The faster the fish swims, the more that it eats, because it actually has red flesh, not white flesh. So the ratio of the tail, so this aspect ratio, is actually a pretty good correlative with its consumption rate. So it's another little rule of thumb if you get really stuck. So you wouldn't use this for every species in every model, but when you get stuck, these kind of little rules of thumb are very useful. But you do have to be quite careful of when you can't use it. So for anything that doesn't have a symmetrical tail, so the shark, they have a really big upper lobe and a little lower lobe, or eels, so they don't have a tail, they are all tailed, you can't use it. But where you can use them, they can prove to be pretty good. So we think about diet in EcoPath, basically it's just the proportion. So all the different entries of what it eats has to sum up to one. Now there's one extra thing that you can slot in here to import, and that's food that comes in from outside the system. So you might have something like a seagull that eats out of the land. So seagulls in Tasmania have an obesity problem because the people have an obesity problem. The rubbish that we throw out is fatty and greasy, so the seagulls eat it and they get fatty and greasy as well. We have the world's most overweight seagulls, according to a recent report. But that's the kind of place where you can put that kind of stuff in. Or another one is if you've got something like the whales we heard about this morning, where they come up to the tropics to have their calves that they eat in the Southern Ocean. So they can't eat anything inside the model domain if you're only looking at the tropics. So that's where you put that kind of stuff The other thing you typically have is that we'll have lumped lots of things together. So you have to be smart about how you do your averaging. So you can have weighted averages, for instance. This is actually why a whole bunch of us have got into biodiversity modelling. Because we pretty much figured out fairly quickly, once we started trying to tackle climate change issues, that we'd all done parameters that were weighted averages, and then we'd held them constant through time as the species composition would have changed. So there's a whole bunch of us around the world at the present moment trying to think up smart ways of allow those parameters to shift through time. So growth rates, consumption rates, potential diet, starting basis to shift through time to represent shifts in diversity. So we're going to play with a model this afternoon that's quite small. Billy is doing a model with, 10 million squares for the whole of the globe and 22,000 species. He is crazy, aren't he? Basically though, what you do is you get food and you break it down into the proportional makeup. It's always got to be by volume and weight. So one of the easiest mistakes that you get amongst the very early users is they have a beautiful data set because someone has made a penguin throw up and then counted the number of krill, and then they've got one squid or one big fish in their diet, and that one big fish actually outweighs the 20 krill, but they've done it in numbers, not volume, so it's all back front. So you have to make sure it's in volume. Some of the other things that you have to think about are the bits that see them flow in and out of the system. So I haven't done it in this case, it's just going to be, there's no outside production, we live in a little closed world if you live with mermaids. But basically you can enter what flows into the system and out of the system, what purposely moves in and out. Or if you've got something that's accumulating. So if you're worried about invasive species, this is one way of putting it in. You have to be very careful of using this one though. So in the past it's been used where something like a seal or a whale is recovering from having fishing taken off it. The problem is when you go time dynamic, that accumulation continues. So you can't get that group to fall off regardless of what you do to it. So it's okay for invading species, but you have to be really careful about using it for any other situation. The last thing you have to do is you have to say what happens to your detritus. So you can have multiple detritus, you can have multiple pools. So you can have labile and refractory and discards, and you have to say what's the fate of any dead things, how do they fall out across those. So one trick we often use is to have really freshly dead things, moderately stinky dead things, really, really rotten things, and then carcasses that won't break down. So things that break down in the order of a couple of days, then a couple of months, then a couple of years, and then a couple of decades, and then centuries. So that you've got the different kinds of detritus which aren't as available to the different kinds of animals. But you need to say where it all goes. And you can actually have stuff that gets then shunted out of the system as well. Okay, so that was all the biological side of it. Obviously you've got the human side of it as well. So just as you had to define your animals, you have to define your fleets as well. So we've got the codswallop. So this was that one kids love about fishing boats. The whippersnapper, which just spends again pretty fast to the guy. And then George. I think we've got rid of George and he's the we can play with, but at that point my daughter's favourite name was George and everything got called George, so I had to do that. But basically you can say what their cost breakdowns are here. And these default values are pretty much what you see in every eco-path model that machine hasn't had anything to do with. So there's no fixed costs, 40% of the effort is a variable cost, and have 20% profit, basically. Most people, of all those thousands of eco-path models, most people won't have done economic stuff, but we'll play with it a little bit. And some of Rashid's best stuff has come, or some of Rashid's good stuff that I understand, as opposed to some of the pure economic stuff which goes should, has come from playing with it. So it shouldn't be neglected even though it is. And that probably comes from because most of the modelers who play with this are biologists. So that they're not worrying about the human side of things, but it's just as important. Once you've defined your fleets, you need to say how much they capture each thing. So you have the landings, you say how much they actually land with all the different animals, and you can notice that they don't have to catch everything. Just enter what they do. And you also have to say what they throw away. And that's actually, I haven't put a picture on here, but you could going to land. These are the kinds of data that you need for that part. You need your landings and your discards as a bare minimum. Then it's good to have some of these other economic values. And it's even the potential to have non-market values. So what that means is ex-vessel prices are what the fishery is getting for that product as it comes off the vessel. So what's it worth in the market? This non-market stuff is actually to cover some existence values, like we just want to have there to go sailing in or swimming in, or to have some other industry like tourism represented, so that you can have the tension between the different uses of the system represented as well. Again, not too many people do that part, but the potential's there. So if you think about the comment I made earlier today, that lots of these models have lots of options that not everyone uses. That's another example. And you also, much like had to say where the biological mortality ended up with in terms of the dryness, you need to do that for the discards as well. So this is a discard, oh no, it's landing here. So you need for the discard stuff to say where it's ended up. So in this case, I've only got one kind of detritus. But if you're really worried about thinking about bycatch in a fishery, it's good to have a special kind of detritus that's just discards, so that you can definitely track what's coming out of the fishery. So there's some species around the world, shrimp or prawns are one example, and some of the other species that are really popular, like the pink ling in Australia, they actually benefit from there being a fishery. So if you get rid of the fishery, they decline because they eat their scavengers. So for shrimp, you're stirring up the bottom to make it perfect shrimp habitat. For the pink ling, the discards that come back over the other side. The same thing can happen with seabirds. Some of the seabird populations in the UK, for instance, are a bit out of whack because the big scavenging seabirds have dominated because of trawler discards. But if the trawler discards aren't there, then they turn to eating the little seabirds. So it's not always a simple measure of the big population. Okay, so in the market prices stuff, you can say what they're worth per biomass. So it can be per kilo or per tonne, what they're coming on. So this will happen to be in euros, it can be whatever unit of currency you want. And then once you've done all that, you enter all your data in, and then there used to be a special balance button. These days you just click to a different spreadsheet, and it goes and solves the simultaneous equations for you. And more often than not, you get a message saying, this doesn't balance. Go back and try again. Your EE is greater than 1. So you're trying to use more than you produce in the system. So you can see over here that for the Y's, mermaids, we started off with an ecotrophic efficiency of 6, close to 6. So what we're trying to do in this particular instance was we're trying to use 6 times what was produced. Yep.
And so obviously the fission only starts at a certain size. So do you size structure it, like size structuring the fish or size structuring the fission?
You can do both. So typically you don't want to lump animals that have turnover rates of more than about 3 times different from each other. So even if they both ate plankton, I wouldn't lump a fish this big and a fish that gets to this big. So you need to size structure your animals to a point, so you don't want to get too insane. But also the gear, if it's going to target different things, you tend to try and disaggregate that a little bit too, so that you can more easily look at differential control. Yeah. So pretty much anywhere you get a purple answer there is an answer that's too big. You need to fix it. You should also run your eye over some of the others of these, like a production or consumption of 10. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay, so big fishies that have a plankton-like biomass level, that might be okay. It just depends on what they're. So, okay, here jaws has a Z that's more like a plankton than a shark. So you run your eye over to make sure they haven't had a typo, that doesn't really still make sense. So you have to think like an ecologist at this point. So if you're not an ecologist, you have to go find one and see if they piss themselves laughing when they see what you've done. So there's one problem. Okay, so basically what you do then is you take the kind of pedigrees that Rashid was talking about. So I've got I think I've got a picture in the next one, but basically you say, what's the most uncertain one? So you go through and say, okay, was this sampled in this location, yes or no? Was this sampled from the same sort of reef system or the same area, yes or no? Is it on the same species? Was it on the same continent? Did I just make it up? And then you change your most uncertain ones first and you work backwards to the more sure ones. You can sometimes have to change things you're pretty sure on, because it turns out there was a data oops. That it was it's not always the modeller's fault. It can be quite a lot of the time, but it's not always. So don't be too afraid to go and ask the data person if they've made a mistake. But like I said before, there's some sort of rules of thumb that you can apply just to run your eye over. So the other part is that you can also, if it's not working, you can try and dig into why it's not. So there's some diagnostic spreadsheets that help you do this, so they're all built into the program. So in this case, anything that's a green value is telling you, actually, that's a bit odd, that's too high, actually, if this makes sense. So you can say, okay, we have quite a lot of EEs that are too high, but over here, this fishing rate is actually too high. So you can dig into that, and then sort of a gross level. Or you can get into the predation matrix. You can start saying, okay, so the wise-aged mermaids are having a problem over here, number 4. So number 4 would be Jaws. So Jaws is probably said to be eating too many mermaids. So you can start to target where the problems are. Another rule of thumb, the reason it's highlighted all of those along the diagonal there, is you shouldn't have more than about 10% cannibalism. Now there will be some species on Earth where they do have more than 10% cannibalism. So it's not completely forbidden. But most animals on the planet don't eat more than 10% of their own population during their feeding. And if they do, you get yourself in a really tight loop that just doesn't make ecological sense. It makes mathematical sense. It doesn't make ecological sense. You have to be a bit wary of those. And this is the pedigree I was talking about. You can actually, so in this case, the more red, the better the data was rated to be. You can define what they are. We'll play around with this a little bit this afternoon. But you can go through and say where most uncertain data is. So in my case, I just use that as a guide to what to change. In the older versions, there used to be like a Bayesian fitting method that would go through a Markov process of trying alternative fits to see how likely your fit was compared to all fits. I'm not sure that's implemented in the latest version, but it's certainly something they're working on to make sure it comes to the new version pretty fast. Some of the other tools that are in EcoPath is just sort of communication and network analysis tools. So this is just press a button that tells you what the food web looks like that you've got in the model, and actually the relative biomasses. So you can see that your mermaid babies make up a lot of the biomass compared to jellyfish, for instance, in that example. You can also have some of the classical network analysis kind of stuff that's been bedrock of ecology for 30 odd years. You can get that spat out. Helps you to try and compare between different systems, for instance. And that's all on EcoPath. So before I get into EcoSim, is there any questions that you haven't already asked on EcoPath? You will get to play with it more this afternoon. It's more exciting than it may sound. But I think it's more exciting to be saying something about medical.
But could you go back to please where you introduce your basic parameters?
Basic parameters, yep. That one?
No, the very first one where you introduced yes, this one. This, I think you have overlooked this, but the production biomass, consumption biomass are per year. They are just rate, not from kilometers square.
Yep, they're rates because they're how much produced. So they're a biomass that's produced per kilometre squared per year. So your mass balance is on the order of a year. So how much gets produced in that system in a year?
So it's the rate of loss from the...
Yep. So think of the production of biomass as a mortality rate. That's your total mortality rate for that species.
But is there any way to track errors or uncertainties in the data through the system and see what range?
So in EWE 5, yes, it was really straightforward. 6, it's not so straightforward. So they are working on expansion modules that will help you do that, but it's usually up to you to do the tracking. So it's in any end-to-end model. Atlantis is even worse. And typically in Atlantis you just have your worst case scenario, your best case scenario, for productivity as well as vulnerability and stuff. None of the end-to-end models do handling of uncertainty very well. It's all just almost scenario. So you have if you can imagine a Rubik's Cube with the dimensions of uncertainty, you'll have one for productivity of the system, one for vulnerability or how fast things will recover, one axis that's the degree of, say, climate change or environmental variation, and another dimension that's the human development scenarios. And through that whole hypercube of potential runs, so typically run 500, 1,000 different combinations in your ensemble, and that's how we handle uncertainty.
Just in terms of giving them a sense of, there's been talks about how difficult it is to model some of the things, and we haven't talked much about how the forcing may propagate through the system and so on. Does this toy model makes things look a little too simple?
Yeah, and it's partly the philosophy of the people who put it together. So Carl doesn't like environmental forces. So he really hates seeing a curve doing this because it's an environment ticking over behind. He likes to see a production smoothly going fish because he wants to kind of know general transfers.
No, I mean, that's a good thing, but then it misses the point that the system can jump from one state to another.
We can still get state jumps even without that driver, but it's obviously more common with the driver. In things like Atlantis, we'll try different, well, even when I use EcoPath, I'll try different environmental time series if I have them. We force, in most of the end-to-end models, Atlantis being an example, we'll take either an ensemble, like different climate runs or different hydrodynamic runs, and they create transport vectors off those, so you get the environmental state offline, and you force the system with that. And that can cause additional state changes. So if a period of plankton, so larvae enter the water column and they're not quite the right temperature or not quite the right food, you'll get a different number settling, so you can end up in a different state just because of floods or that kind of pinch. Okay, so for about 10 years before I became EcoPath and EcoSim, EcoPath was as far as anyone went. And then Carl Walters thought, EcoPath is shit. It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Single species only. This stupid bloody